In today's video, we're taking a look at some updated NHL trade rumors, most of which comes from the 31 Thoughts blog by Elliotte Friedman. Plus, we have Michael Hutchinson on waivers and an update on the Dustin Byfuglien situation. We'll jump into all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a few news items and some trade rumors I want to look at today. Let's kick things off with news from the NHL waiver wire. The Toronto Maple Leafs have placed goaltender Michael Hutchinson on waivers for the purpose of being assigned to the American Hockey League's Toronto Marlies team. Of course, teams have up to 24 hours from the time he's placed on waivers, which is noon Eastern time, to make a claim. So we'll find out at noon Eastern time tomorrow whether or not he clears and is there assigned to the Marlies, or if a team decides to take a chance and put a claim in on the goaltender. He certainly had a bit of an up and down season. Of course, we've known really since the trade with the Los Angeles Kings that brought in goaltender Jack Campbell that this was an inevitability. It would be happening soon, and just had to wait for goaltender Frederik Andersen, of course the bona fide starter, to be returning from injury, which is happening tonight against the Dallas Stars. So now they will run with Andersen and Campbell and assign Hutchinson down to the minors if he does indeed clear waivers. So I'd love to know your thoughts down in the comments. Do you think another team will take a chance and put a claim in on Hutchinson, or will he be assigned to the Marlies as of tomorrow? Now, we also had an update from the Winnipeg Jets general manager Kevin Cheveldayoff talking on a few items today. One of the items he discussed was the Dustin Byfuglien situation, and even though there's been reports as of the last week or two that they were close to reaching a resolution, Cheveldayoff really didn't have a lot to offer, basically saying that they've been working on a resolution since the first day of training camp when this news all kind of came to be, that this situation presented itself to him and the organization, and that as of right now, even though there's been reports out there indicating that things are close, that there's really nothing new to report on. I can't help but be concerned here that things are really dragging on for this, and hopefully the Winnipeg Jets can get a resolution in place before the trade deadline so they don't potentially end up getting screwed out of being able to add another player to help them with their playoff push here. Clearly the Jets would like to make an acquisition and replace a longer term contract on defense, someone who could fit in well with their top four blue liners for the next few years, and that's going to be difficult to do until they actually have the space to do that, with the Byfuglien contract being taken out of the equation here. So I guess we'll have to wait and see, but as of right now, we don't have any reason to believe, based on the Jets' comments, that they're any closer to coming to a resolution here with Dustin Byfuglien. One trade I wanted to follow up on quickly as well that we had touched on as a rumor back in the last week or so was Kyle Connor of the Winnipeg Jets possibly gaining a lot of interest from the Colorado Avalanche, and they were offering top prospect defenseman Bowen Byram. Elliotte Friedman did touch on this trade rumor in his latest 31 Thoughts blog, and he mentions that he had heard that it was Byram and Kamenev being offered in exchange for Connor, but after checking around with other sources and other executives around the league, that there wasn't as much to it, and that if there was any kind of proposal made to the Jets, that it really wouldn't go anywhere, and that that's not a trade that he expects to take place. I don't think the Jets trade Kyle Connor at all. It doesn't really make sense. I mean, unless they're offered a bona fide, legitimate top number one defenseman right now is already established, I don't see that happening. Connor's been their top scorer this year, one of their top players, just signed a long-term deal, and it would absolutely make no sense at all to trade him unless you're really getting a major acquisition in return, which at this point Byram could be that, but they're not going to trade him for an unknown, unproven quantity here at the NHL level. So I guess we'll see, but for right now, I wouldn't be surprised if teams were interested in Kyle Connor, as I mentioned before, but I don't see the Jets moving him. I just don't see them being presented with an offer that really makes it a serious possibility. Now, as we mentioned before, the Carolina Hurricanes are certainly in the market for a defenseman after losing Dougie Hamilton. And as we've also discussed before, owner Tom Dundon is not a fan of rental players. If he's going to be having his organization make trades, he wants it to be a hockey trade where they can acquire a talent who has term on his deal, can be a member of the organization for some time. So if you look around the NHL and take a look at some of the defensemen who would make sense, certainly Matt Dumba, the Minnesota Wild, fits the bill. Now, Michael Russo, the Athletic, who covers the Wild closely, was asked this in a recent column, and he suggested that if the Carolina Hurricanes came calling to the Wild looking for a Matt Dumba trade, that they would probably be looking for young center iceman Martin Necas in return. Now, GM of the Wild, Bill Guerin, has made it clear in enough conversations and reports that he is really looking to bolster the center position with Minnesota. He ideally wants a number one center or a number two center along with something else if he's going to trade one of his top defensemen like Dumba or Jonas Brodin. And certainly Necas is not a well-established one or two center as of yet, but he's Certainly has a lot of potential, has had a decent young career so far, and certainly could fit the bill. I don't think Natchez would be all they would have to include to get the deal done, but he could be the centerpiece in a package going from Carolina to Minnesota should they explore those conversations a little bit further. But certainly if you look like a guy like Dumba or even like a Shane Gostisbehere with the Philadelphia Flyers is another name that kind of fits what Carolina is looking for, although a little less likely to be trading with division rivals when they're battling for playoff spots. Even though the player fits, probably not a good time right now. Something like that would be more likely for the offseason if it did happen. But clearly Carolina is in the market here, and Dumba certainly fits the bill. So we'll see if they pursue that further. The other thing that complicates a potential Natchez for Dumba trade is the Carolina Hurricanes have multiple first-round picks, and that would be their preferred asset to trade to gain a defenseman. So I'm not really sure that that's going to be something that's going to actually fit the bill for Minnesota, although they probably wouldn't be opposed to a first-round pick, but a first-round pick and a player like Natchez might not be where the Hurricanes want to go with a package, might deem it to be too much of their future being included in that. So I guess we will see what happens, but Carolina looking for a defenseman, the first-round pick, either their own or the one they obtained from the Maple Leafs, is the preferred asset, looking to be traded to make the acquisition. Now, the Florida Panthers are another team looking for help on the blue line, and apparently, according to Elliot Friedman's 31 Thoughts blog, Mike Matheson is a defenseman they've been trying to trade for some time, and apparently there is interest around the league, but his longer-term contract does complicate things, and some of the teams that have been interested might not be able to take on the contract at this exact time, so it might be a player that might be easier to be moved during the offseason, but the Panthers have been certainly linked to trying to find another defense partner for Aaron Ekblad. It's been mentioned before about a potential Mike Hoffman trade to help facilitate that. He's a pending UFA. They very well might not be able to bring him back. He might be looking for too much of a contract that won't fit their cap situation. There's a strong possibility he leaves as a pending free agent if he's not moved. However, going into the playoffs, considering where they're at in the standings, I don't see the Panthers trading one of their top scorers. I mean, they do have lots of scoring in the forward group. There's no shortage of that up there, but to lose a weapon like that would not really sure that makes the most sense, even though they do need help on the blue line. They have plenty of other prospects that they could potentially use as trade bait to help facilitate that type of transaction. And obviously they prefer to move Matheson for a different type of defenseman. But the main defenseman that comes to mind they've been linked to is Los Angeles Kings veteran D. Alec Martinez, who still has a year left on his contract. Very versatile. He can play both sides. He's a pretty solid defensive defenseman. Doesn't give you a lot of offense, but he's a pretty smart D back there. He's got lots of experience. Obviously has some Stanley Cups to his name. So clearly a player that many teams are attracted to, including the Florida Panthers as well as a few others here. So certainly look for Florida to possibly be active, but the more likely scenario is if they can find a suitor for Mike Matheson to take that contract on. That would give them a lot more flexibility. There's a lot of people also wonder if they might go down the road of possibly looking for a backup goaltender. Clearly, Bobrovsky's had its ups and downs this year, and they would like to have a little bit more depth in the goaltending position heading into the playoffs. Can't help but wonder, maybe if there is a team out there who would take a chance on Michael Hutchinson, maybe it would be the Panthers, who are familiar with him. He was in Florida before being part of the Leafs organization, where he's on waivers. Maybe they would take a chance and put in a claim. I guess we'll see at noon Eastern time tomorrow once the waiver wire updates come through. So we'll see what happens, but I do expect Florida to make some moves here ahead of the deadline. Now, one team that was discussed in the 31 Thoughts blog as well as some other articles recently is the Edmonton Oilers. Now, of course, with Connor McDavid being out for a few weeks, that certainly does complicate their plans ahead of the deadline. NHL insiders felt they would likely add a scoring winger would be the most logical thing for them to add before the playoffs, before the NHL Trade Deadline. But with McDavid being out, there's now some questioning whether or not they would want somebody who could play center. I know there's been some talk about Pajot in Ottawa, but I'm not really sure they're going to want to pay the price tag that the Senators would be looking for. And there's no foregone conclusion that Ottawa moves him anyway. They very well could bring him in for a new contract, and he might remain with the Sens organization. But either way, the Edmonton Oilers, there's a few things we did learn of things that they do not want to include in a trade for a rental player, and that would be their first round pick this year in the draft. They don't want to include Jesse Puljujarvi or any of their top defensive prospects like Philip Broberg or Evan Bouchard. None of those pieces would be included for a rental piece. Now, doesn't mean if the right hockey trade didn't come along, they wouldn't consider it. I think Puljujarvi, of course, would be the most likely one to be moved, but he would have to be packaged likely with something. But the Oilers are not going to want to give up a big part of their future for a rental situation for this year's playoff run. That's not something that Ken Holland is interested in and clearly wants to build for the future and have a lot of these assets in place for a long time. So we'll see what the Oilers end up doing. Do they address their need for the wingers, or do they possibly look for a short-term solution at center ice as well, with McDavid being out? Obviously, with these next couple of weeks with McDavid being out are going to be a big part of their season, and whether or not they can remain in playoff contention while he's out of the picture here. If they end up going into a losing streak without McDavid in the lineup, then it very well could impact their plans if they're no longer sitting in a playoff spot here in 2 or 3 weeks' time. Now, there's also been a lot of talk about the New Jersey Devils, considering where they're at in the standings. There's lots of players on their team and roster that make sense for trade. There's some that apparently we've learned would likely take a significant hockey trade to bring in some really proven young assets to make a consideration. And that'd be guys like Kyle Palmieri or Blake Coleman or even Nikita Gusev as well. Clearly, the Devils, if they're going to make any of those types of trades, they want proven young players. They don't want top prospects. They don't want draft picks. They want players that are already in the league and they've already had a chance to see how they perform at the NHL level, who could fit with a new young core they're trying to build around. So it's unlikely that those type of players are moved here in the next couple of weeks. But clearly some UFAs, like Sami Vatanen, is the most likely to be traded. He certainly garnered a fair bit of interest. There is Andy Green as well. He's been with the Devils a long time as a pending UFA. And then there's also Wayne Simmons within the forward group as well. Those three players are pretty likely to be traded if the right deal comes along. Vatanen being the most likely. Not sure there'd be as much interest in the other two, but if the right deal is there, the Devils will consider that. But we don't expect New Jersey to be making any of those other players with term available unless a significant offer comes along with a prized young player that they can add to their core. So that is all your latest news and rumor updates for today. So of course, as always, I want to know your thoughts and opinions, so make sure you leave some comments down below and we'll continue the conversation. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing, turning on your notifications, and checking out our membership options as well. There's lots of great perks and different ways you can support Top Shelf Hockey, and I'd appreciate it if you checked it out. Thank you very much for watching, everybody, and I will catch you next time.